Exterior courthouse, establishing, insert, courthouse, town of Darkshire, Okadur Empire, September 23, 2545. Scott Blanchard, a murderer, had just arrived on the premises of the courthouse. He is escorted out of the back of the prison transport truck. 2 police officers move to Scott's side. There is a huge crowd of people gathering around the area. They are witnessing the procession. Police officer number 1 says,
"Move it, inmate."
Police officer number 2 says,
"Yeah, your time in court is now."
Scott Blanchard says,
"You fools don't have any proof that I committed the murders."
Police officer number 1 says,
"Move it, before I mace you." "Got it."
Scott Blanchard says,
"I'm on it."
Scott attempts to escape. The 2 police officers grab him. Police officer number 1 maces him. Scott screams in pain. Police officer number 1 says,
"I told you that you will be maced if you do not comply. Now get a move on."
Scott Blanchard says,
"All right, I'll comply."
Police officer number 2 says.
Good move.
The trio head towards the front door of the courthouse. Kate Nicholson, a news reporter, is there on the scene. She is there with her news crew. They are broadcasting the events. Kate Nicholson says,
"Greetings. This is Kate Nicholson, reporting for the Daily Watch Bulletin. I'm here on the Darkshire
Kate Nicholson says,
courthouse. Today is the first day of the trial of Scott Blanchard, a man accused in a series of murders. The most recent murder is that of Laura Cline."
Kate sees the trio come closer to her position. She approaches the trio. Kate Nicholson says,
"Hello, this is Kate Nicholson. Could I get a quick question for the accused?"
Police officer number 2 says,
Sure, just try to make it quick. We don't have much time.
Police officer number 1 says,
"Not likely."
Police officer number 2 says,
Hey, at least this will make for a good news bit.
Police officer number 1 says.
"Fine, if you say so."
Both police officers turn Scott towards Kate. They hold him in position. Kate Nicholson says,
"Excuse me, Mr. Blanchard. Could I have a word with you?"
Scott Blanchard says.
"Sure thing, little lady."
Kate Nicholson says,
"What do you have to say about the accusations directed towards you?"
Scott Blanchard says.
"Oh, I'm innocent of all the charges. Really, who's to say for certain about the charges?"
Kate Nicholson says.
"This is rather interesting."
Police officer number 1 says.
"We should be moving now."
Police officer number 2 says.
Yes, no more questions.
Kate Nicholson says.
"Understood. All right. There you have it. A simple statement from the accused. This is Kate Nicholson, reporter for the Daily Watch Bulletin, signing off."
Hunter Woodard, the cameraman, nods in agreement. Hunter Woodard says,
"All right, that's a wrap."
Hunter lowers the camera. He and Kate head over to the news van. Hunter enters the back of the news van. Jensen Black, another one of the crew members, sees the pair. Jensen Black says,
"That was certainly interesting."
Hunter Woodard says.
"Yeah, we have enough footage."
Jensen Black says.
"Yeah, we should get back to the news station as soon as possible. The boss will be wanting that footage soon."
Hunter Woodard says.
"Of course, we wouldn't want to keep him waiting."
Kate Nicholson says.
"Yeah."
Kate heads over to the front of the van. She opens the door on the driver's side of the van. She enters the van. She uses the seatbelt. She inserts the keys into the ignition. Hunter closes the back door of the van. Kate looks to the back of the van. Kate Nicholson says.
"Are you guys ready to go?"
Hunter Woodard says.
"Yes."
Jensen Black says.
"Yes."
Kate Nicholson says.
"That's good. Let's go."
The team leave the area. Cut to interior courtroom. Day. Scott is brought into the courtroom. There are a crowd of people in the gallery. Scott is taken over to the defendant's table. Megan Cooper, the attorney assigned to the case, is sitting at the table. She sees him. Megan Cooper says.
"So, you must be Scott Blanchard."
Scott Blanchard says.
"Yes, I most certainly am."
Megan Cooper says.
"Good. I'm Megan Cooper. I'll be the one defending you in this case."
Scott Blanchard says.
"This should be interesting."
Scott sits down at the table. Megan sits down at the table. She starts reading the case file. Megan Cooper says.
"Oh dear."
Scott Blanchard says.
"What is it?"
Megan Cooper says.
"There are some serious charges here in the case file. It seems that you are being charged with several counts of murder. Not only that, it seems there are several counts of theft, as well as several counts of rape."
Scott Blanchard says.
"Oh yeah, I did have some relations with some of my victims."
Megan Cooper says.
"If by relations, you mean to say that you raped them, then yes."
Scott Blanchard says.
"Yeah, That's right, I raped them.
Megan Cooper says.
You are truly a piece of work.
Scott Blanchard says.
Thanks.
Megan Cooper says.
This should be an interesting trial.
Scott Blanchard says.
Of course.
The pair sit down at the table. Evan Miller, the bailiff, enters the room. Evan Miller says.
All rise. The Honorable Judge Henry Grant is entering.
Everyone rises. Judge Henry Grant enters the room. He proceeds to approach the judge's bench. He proceeds to sit down. Evan Miller says.
Please be seated.
Henry Grant says.
Thank you, bailiff.
Evan Miller says.
You're welcome, Your Honor.
Everyone sits down. Henry Grant says.
All right, what's on the docket for today?
Evan hands Henry the docket for the case. Henry reads the docket. Henry Grant says.
Well, it seems that we have a murder case on our hands.
Evan Miller says.
Yes, there's also some other charges on the docket as well.
Henry reads the docket. Henry Grant says.
Oh dear. There's also some rape charges on the list. This is very bad.
Evan Miller says.
Yes, Your Honor.
Henry proceeds to sit down at the bench. Everyone else sits down. Henry Grant says.
All right, court is in session. How does the defendant plead?
Scott Blanchard says.
Not guilty, Your Honor.
Megan Cooper says.
You have got to be kidding me. Not guilty, really.
Scott Blanchard says.
What do you expect of me?
Megan Cooper says.
I don't know. How about saying guilty?
Scott Blanchard says.
What do you mean?
Megan Cooper says.
There's more than enough evidence that proves you committed all those heinous crimes.
Scott Blanchard says.
I have an angle.
Megan Cooper says.
This should be interesting. All right, I'll bite. What is this angle of yours?
Scott Blanchard says.
I have a character witness who will influence the jury and everyone here to side with me.
Megan Cooper says.
This should be interesting.
Scott Blanchard says.
Just you wait and see.
Henry turns to face Cedric Bowers, the prosecutor. Henry Grant says.
All right, prosecutor, you can call your first witness.
Cedric Bowers says.
Will a Mr. Nico Sawyer approach the bench?
The camera pans over to Nico Sawyer. Nico approaches the prosecutor's table. He sees Cedric. Cedric Bowers says.
Please take your seat on the witness stand.
Nico Sawyer says.
Understood.
Nico proceeds to approach the witness stand. He sits down on the seat for the witness stand. Cedric approaches the witness stand. Cedric Bowers says.
Please state your name for the court.
Nico Sawyer says.
I am Nico Sawyer.
Cedric Bowers says.
How do you know the accused?
Nico Sawyer says.
We have been friends for years now.
Cedric Bowers says.
How many years would that be?
Nico Sawyer says.
I would say at least 10 years.
Cedric Bowers says.
This is rather interesting. How would you describe the accused?
Nico Sawyer says.
I would have to say that he is a great man. He wouldn't harm a fly.
Cedric Bowers says.
This is rather interesting. Did you know that he stands accused of several counts of murder?
Nico Sawyer says.
He's accused of murder.
Cedric Bowers says.
Yes, several counts of first-degree murder. He also stands accused of rape.
Nico Sawyer says.
Oh my God, this is serious.
Cedric Bowers says.
Yes, this is why I ask of you to tell the truth.
Nico Sawyer says.
Oh, you suspect that I'm lying.
Cedric Bowers says.
Yes, that's exactly my point.
Nico Sawyer says.
In that case, I still stand by my point.
Cedric Bowers says.
For the record, let it show that the witness stands by his testimony about the accused.
Henry Grant says.
I'll allow it.
Henry turns to the stenographer. She is currently typing the notes for the archives. Henry Grant says.
Stenographer, are you getting this?
Stenographer says.
Of course, Your Honor.
Henry Grant says.
That's great. Now then, Mr. Prosecutor, please continue.
Cedric Bowers says.
With pleasure, Your Honor.
Cedric faces Nico. Cedric Bowers says.
Now then, Mr. Sawyer, were you aware of the reasons why Scott is here today in court?
Nico Sawyer says.
Yes, he stands accused of several counts of murder, as well as several counts of rape.
Cedric Bowers says.
Yes, I'm sure we can get down to the bottom of this.
Fade to interior courtroom. Day later, Nico is now being cross-examined by Megan. He answers all the questions. Henry Grant says.
You may now step down.
Nico Sawyer says.
Understood, Your Honor.
Nico leaves the witness stand. Scott Blanchard says.
So, what do you think so far?
10. Megan Cooper says.
You might actually have a chance at winning this case.
Scott Blanchard says.
Of course.
Fade to interior courtroom. Day later, Henry is at the bench. Evan is with him. Evan Miller says.
Have you come to a verdict, Your Honor?
Henry Grant says.
Yes, I most certainly have.
Evan Miller says.
That's great, Your Honor.
Henry Grant says.
Will the accused please rise?
Scott Blanchard says.
Of course, Your Honor.
Scott stands up. Megan also stands up. Henry Grant says.
On all of the charges, I hereby find the defendant, Scott Blanchard, guilty.
Scott is shocked. Scott Blanchard says.
I can't believe this. I was so certain that I would be able to turn the trial in my favor.
Megan Cooper says.
It would seem to be the opposite outcome for you.
Scott Blanchard says.
Yes, but I'm sure that I can survive in prison.
11. Megan Cooper says.
Yes. From the looks of it, you're going to be going away for a long time.
Henry Grant says.
Order in the court.
Megan Cooper says.
Understood, Your Honor.
Henry Grant says.
As I was saying, I hereby sentence Scott Blanchard to life in prison without the chance of parole. Furthermore, you will be spending the entirety of your sentence in Ravenhall Max Security Prison. May God have mercy on your soul.
Henry bangs the gavel. Scott Blanchard says.
I can't believe this.
Megan Cooper says.
Yeah, it looks like you're going away for a long time.
Scott Blanchard says.
Oh well, I was really hoping I would actually be found innocent.
Megan sees the bailiff approach Scott. The bailiff proceeds to place the handcuffs on Scott's wrists. He proceeds to lead Scott out of the courtroom. Megan Cooper says.
Well then, that's another failure in my career.
Cedric Bowers says.
Yes, that's rather unfortunate that your client had lost the case. He was so close to winning this one.
Megan Cooper says.
Yeah, I'm rather surprised that it had lasted as long as it did.
Cedric Bowers says.
How so?
12. Megan Cooper says.
To be honest, with all of the crimes he had committed, the evidence all pointed to him being guilty.
Cedric Bowers says.
Good point.
They see Scott being hauled out of the courthouse. Exterior courthouse. Afternoon. Scott is transported over to the prison transport vehicle. Police officer number 2 says.
All right, move it.
Police officer number 1 says.
Yeah, move it.
They usher Scott into the prison bus. The bus doors are locked on both sides of the door. Interior prison bus. Afternoon. Scott is placed on one of the seats in the prison bus. He sees the prison bus begin to move. Scott Blanchard says.
One day, I will have my revenge.
Fade to exterior Darkshire Street. Night. A small town in the Okadur Empire. Exterior house. Night. Cali Cline's house, where she lives alone. Interior bedroom. Night. We see Cali in bed, sleeping. Exterior dreamscape. Day. We enter a dreamscape of a green idyllic countryside, lush and peaceful. Cali is walking along a path when she sees an old woman walking towards her. The woman slowly removes her 13 hood to reveal Laura Cline, her aunt. Laura Cline says,
Cali, I need to tell you something very important.
Cali looks at her curiously. Cali Cline says,
What is it, Aunt Laura?
Laura Cline says,
I was murdered by Scott Blanchard. He recently escaped from Ravenhold Max Security Prison. He is now seeking vengeance.
Cali is horrified. Cali Cline says,
But why?
Laura does not answer, and her figure starts to fade away. Cali shakes her head in disbelief. Fade out, fade in. Interior bedroom. Morning. Cali Cline is in her bedroom dressed in her nightwear, rubbing her eyes as she lazily approaches her desk. Cali Cline says,
Today's the day.
Cali slides open the drawer of her desk and retrieves her phone. She dials a number and takes a seat on her bed, determination in her chest. Exterior phone screen, phone POV. We focus on the number being dialed and the familiar name that appears. Dexter Collins. Cut to 14. Interior bedroom. Morning. Cali's face is illuminated by the phone's light as she waits for Dexter to pick up. Dexter Collins says,
Hey babe, you ready for today?
Cali Cline says,
Dexter, I had the strangest dream last night. I think it's important.
Exterior phone screen, phone POV. Dexter's expression shifts to one of disbelief. Dexter Collins says,
Okay, I'm listening.
Cut to interior Cali's room. Morning. Cali's voice starts to waver as she recounts her dream. Cali Cline says,
I was with Laura, my aunt.
She pauses, her emotions boiling up as she reminisces. Cali Cline says,
And then I woke up.
Exterior phone screen, phone POV. Dexter reassures her and promises to look into it. Dexter Collins says,
I'll do some research and see what I can find.
Cut to interior Cali's room. Morning. Cali looks at her desk, determination in her eyes. 15. Cali Cline says,
Thank you, Dexter. I appreciate it.
Exterior phone screen, phone POV. We see Dexter smile, pride evident in his voice. Dexter Collins says,
Anything for you, love.
Cut to interior Callie's room. Morning, we hear a soft ding as Dexter sends her the articles he found. Cali Cline says,
Oh my God.
Exterior phone screen, phone POV. Dexter's face appears on the screen again, worry in his eyes. Dexter Collins says,
Callie, you alright? What did you find?
Cut to interior Callie's room. Morning, we see Callie stare directly into the camera, her face still but determination more evident than ever. Cali Cline says,
Scott Blanchard, he was my aunt's murderer. He escaped from prison.
She takes a breath and turns away from the camera, ready to take action. Cali Cline says,
Let's make a plan.
Fade in. 16. Exterior Darkshire Street. Day. We see Scott Blanchard walking through the town of Darkshire, an ominous sky reflecting the mood of the people of this town in the Okadur Empire. He passes by an old department store and stops in his tracks. He looks at it intently. Interior department store. Day. Scott goes inside and sees an old knife on a shelf. He takes it off and examines it. He then proceeds to leave with it. Interior store. Day. Suddenly, Scott hears a voice. It's Andrew Smith, an employee at the store. Andrew Smith says,
Hey. You can't have that.
Interior store. Day. Scott turns around and looks at Andrew. He stabs him repeatedly with the knife he had picked up. Andrew screams in pain as he falls to the ground. Scott then leaves the store, leaving Andrew lying on the floor in pain and suffering. Exterior telephone booth. Day. We see Scott at the payphone nearby. He looks down at the address he had managed to get from the operator for Cali Cline. He turns to leave. Fade to exterior Darkshire. Day. We see Scott Blanchard, a serial killer, on the outskirts of the town of Darkshire. He looks around warily, searching for a safe place to stay. He spots an old department store and makes his way over to it. Cut to exterior department store. Day. We see the old department store. Scott looks around for an ideal spot and finds an old abandoned house nearby. He smiles to himself, feeling as if he has found the perfect. 17. Hideout. Cut to interior abandoned house. Day. We see Scott inside the abandoned house. He is making plans, plotting out his next moves. Cut to exterior Callie's home. Day. We see Cali Cline talking to her boyfriend, Dexter Collins, about what they should do now that they know Scott is in the vicinity. Cali Cline says,
We have to call Julian Arthurson. He's a police officer, and also Dexter's uncle.
Dexter Collins says,
Right. We should tell him what's going on.
They both rush off in the direction of the police station. Fade to interior dark streets of Darkshire. Night. A lone figure approaches through the shadows. Scott Blanchard, a serial killer. His face is shrouded in darkness, but his intent is clear. He is back in Darkshire for one reason: revenge. Almost like a ghost, he disappears into the night, stalking the streets with the intent of finding another victim. His mind flashes back to the reason he is in town: Cali Cline, who sent him to prison for rape. The memories fuel his rage and push him forward, his steps like malicious whispers echoing down the alleys. He is the hunter and his victims are the prey. Suddenly, the sound of a door opens, and a young woman steps out into the darkness. Unaware of the danger that awaits her, she moves closer to him. Scott's eyes narrow and his heart leaps into his throat. He does not move, but the woman is drawn to him with an almost supernatural force. Without hesitating, she steps closer. 18. But before she can get any closer, Scott strikes. In a blinding flash of malice, he grabs her and drags her down into the darkness. The streets are now silent, and the shadows hold a terrible secret. Fade in on a quiet town of Darkshire in the Okadur Empire. Cut to Cali Cline and Dexter Collins walking down the street, walking towards a police station. Dexter Collins says,
We're almost there. My uncle Julian works here as a police officer. Hopefully he can tell us more about Scott Blanchard's return.
Cut to inside the police station. Cali and Dexter enter to find Julian Austin, Dexter's uncle. Julian Austin says,
Dexter, it's good to see you. What brings you here?
Cali Cline says,
We need your help, Julian. We're trying to find out more about the return of Scott Blanchard.
Julian Austin says,
Ah, yes. I've heard about that. It's been rather mysterious. We don't know much yet, but I'll do some digging and see what I can find out.
Dexter and Cali says,
Thanks, Julian.
Cut to Dexter and Cali walking out of the police station. Dexter Collins says,
That was strange. I'm not sure what to make of it.
19. Cali Cline says,
Me either. I think we should keep searching until we get some answers.
Fade in. Interior Scott Blanchard's hideout. Scott Blanchard is pacing around the room, lost in thought. He knows he needs a cell phone as part of his plan to get revenge on Cali Cline. Scott Blanchard says,
I need a cell phone. A plan doesn't work if there's no way to communicate.
He gets an idea and heads out of the hideout. Cut to Interior Department Store. Scott arrives at the department store he visited prior. He heads straight to the electronics department. Scott Blanchard says,
I need to find a cheap cell phone.
He browses through the selection and finds one that suits his needs. He pays for it and leaves the store, clutching the phone to his chest. Cut to Interior Scott Blanchard's hideout. Scott returns to his hideout and sets up the cell phone. He takes a deep breath and begins to harass Cali over the phone. Scott Blanchard says,
This is it. Time to get revenge on Cali Cline.
Fade out. 20. Scene opens at an old abandoned house. It is the hideout of Scott Blanchard, a serial killer. He is standing in the middle of a dark room making frightening noises. He then takes out a cell phone, which has a distinctive green glow. He begins to dial a number. Cut to Cali, who receives the call on her cell phone. She is sitting on her bed in her bedroom. Cali Cline says,
Hello.
Scott Blanchard says,
Hello there, Cali. How are you today?
Cali Cline says,
Who is this?
Scott Blanchard says,
Can't you guess?
Cali struggles to deal with the situation. Her heart races as she realizes who has called her. Scott Blanchard says,
We need to talk, Cali. I'll be in touch soon.
Cali hangs up, shivering in fear. Cut back to Scott at his hideout, still looking menacing. Fade out. Scene opens to an old, abandoned house. It is dark and eerie. Scott Blanchard, a serial killer, enters with a new cell phone in his hand. Scott Blanchard says,
At last, I'm in my hideout. Now I can have some privacy to do what I do best.
Scott takes out his cell phone. 21. Scott Blanchard says,
Time to take out some frustration on poor Cali.
He dials a number and awaits the answer. Cali Cline says,
Hello? Who is this?
Scott Blanchard says,
Hey Cali, guess who?
Cali Cline says,
Scott. What do you want?
Scott Blanchard says,
Just checking in to see how you're doing. I haven't heard from you.
Cali Cline says,
Please leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with you.
Scott Blanchard says,
You know I can find you anytime I want. Don't make me angry, Cali.
Cali Cline says,
Please stay away from me.
Scott hangs up the phone, still chuckling. Scott Blanchard says,
That's how it's done. No one can stop me now.
Fade to exterior dusk higher. Day. We see Cali Cline walking down the street, heading home. She has a scowl on her face as she reads through her messages on her phone. Suddenly, her phone rings. 22. Cut to Interior Cali's house. A few minutes later, Cali is now in her home. She answers her phone and it's Scott Blanchard, a serial killer. Scott Blanchard says,
Cali, it's Scott. You know why I'm calling.
We see Cali's face filled with terror as she clutches her phone tightly. Cali Cline says,
What do you want?
Scott Blanchard says,
I'm back and I'm getting my revenge for Laura's involvement in sending me to prison.
Cali Cline says,
Get away from me.
She slams the phone down and turns away, visibly shaking. Cut to exterior dusk higher street. Day. Cali runs out of her house, trying to find someone to help her. She sees Dexter Collins, her boyfriend, walking down the street. Cali Cline says,
Dexter.
Dexter turns around and sees Cali running towards him. Dexter Collins says,
What's wrong?
Cali explains what has happened, breathing heavily. Cali Cline says,
We need to get your uncle, Julian Austin, and the police involved. We need to get a wiretap.
23. Dexter Collins says,
That's a good idea. Let's go.
They start to walk off camera as the scene fades out. Interior Julian Austin's house. Scene opens with Cali and Dexter entering Julian's home. Julian, Dexter's uncle, is standing in the doorway. Fade into mid-shot of the trio. Cali says,
Hello, Julian.
Julian Austin says,
Hello to both of you. What can I do for you two?
Dexter steps forward. Dexter Collins says,
We need a favor. We need you to help us get a wiretap. We're trying to trace Scott's location.
Julian says,
I see. How did you know he was here in Duskhire?
Dexter Collins says,
Long story, but we've got a good lead on where he is now.
Julian Austin says,
Okay, I'll help you.
What are your thoughts on this?
Cali says.
I'm glad Dexter asked for your help. Your expertise with wiretapping is unmatched.
24. Julian Austin says.
Sounds like you two trust me. I appreciate that. It would be illegal to tap a phone without permission from the district head or a warrant. So I hope you have a way to get permission.
Dexter says.
We do. We'll get the warrant. We just need you to do the work.
Julian Austin says.
No problem. I'll help you out.
Fade to Cali and Dexter enter the town of Duskire. Cali Cline says.
Wow, look at this place.
Dexter Collins says.
It's definitely something.
They walk up to the courthouse and enter. Cali Cline says.
We're here to see Henry Grant, the judge who presided on the court trial of Scott Blanchard.
They find Henry Grant and explain their situation. Dexter Collins says.
We need to ask you to get a warrant for a wiretap. Scott has escaped from prison and we need to find him.
Henry Grant says.
I understand your concern. I'll issue a warrant for a wiretap right away.
Henry issues the warrant. 25. Cali Cline says.
Thank you, Henry. We really appreciate this.
Henry Grant says.
It's my pleasure. Good luck on finding Scott.
Cali and Dexter leave the courthouse. Dexter Collins says.
Let's get to work. We've got a wiretap to set up.
Cali Cline says.
Let's do it.
Fade to exterior Duskire. Dusk. Cali Cline and Dexter Collins stand outside of Duskire police station. They look around, taking in the sights of the Okadur Empire. Dexter Collins says.
We made it.
Cali Cline says.
Yeah, but what now?
Dexter Collins says.
We have to find my uncle, Julian Austin. He's one of the police officers here.
Cali Cline says.
Let's go.
Interior police station. Dusk. Cali and Dexter enter the police station. They spot Julian and approach him. Dexter Collins says.
Uncle Julian.
Julian Austin says.
Dexter, my boy, what brings you here?
26. Dexter Collins says.
We have a warrant for a wiretap.
Julian Austin says.
Ah, I see. Let me take a look.
Julian takes the warrant and looks over it. Julian Austin says.
This looks in order. Let's get started.
Julian leads Cali and Dexter to a back room where the wiretap equipment is. They start to set it up. Interior police station back room. Dusk. Cali Cline says.
All right, let's try to trace the call.
Cali hooks up her cell phone to the wiretap equipment. Dexter and Julian watch, concerned. Julian Austin says.
Be careful. Scott knows we're after him. He might suspect something.
We now hear Scott Blanchard's voice coming over the phone. Scott Blanchard says.
Did you get what I sent?
Cali nods. There is an uncomfortable pause. Cali Cline says.
Yes.
Suddenly, Scott's tone changes. Scott Blanchard says.
Wait. Are you tracing this call?
The others exchange a worried look. Cali pauses, not sure what to say. Cali Cline says.
No. Of course not.
Scott hangs up before they could properly trace the call. 27. Fade to exterior Darkshire. Day. Cali Cline is walking through the bustling streets of the town of Darkshire. The sun is blazing overhead, and the citizens of the Okadur Empire are out in full force. Suddenly, Cali spots Scott Blanchard in the crowd, walking in her direction. Cali freezes for a moment. She was not expecting to see him here. Cali quickly dives into the crowd, trying to lose Scott. She hastily turns corners and ducks into alleyways, ducking in and out of the throng of people. With a few quick impulses, she manages to lose Scott and the crowd. Cali manages to make it to work on time, albeit a bit shaken. As she steps inside, she takes a deep breath and relaxes. Exterior Cali's workplace. Day. We see Cali enter her workplace. She looks around and then proceeds to her office. Interior workplace. Day. We see Cali working diligently at her cubicle. Exterior break area. Day. Cali takes her break and walks to the break area. She meets one of her co-workers. Co-worker says.
Hey there, Cali. How are you?
Cali Cline says.
Hey. I'm all right. How about you?
Co-worker says.
I'm okay. What's up?
Cali Cline says.
Well, I've been kind of stressed lately. I just encountered Scott Blanchard, you know, that serial killer.
28. Co-worker says.
Oh wow, that is serious. Are you all right?
Cali Cline says.
Yeah, I'm okay, but I'm a bit scared. I don't feel like I'm safe.
Co-worker says.
You should go to the police and get a protective order. That might help.
Cali Cline says.
Yeah. I'll do that today.
Fade out. Exterior courthouse. Day. The courthouse is an old building located in the center of the town. The Ocador Empire flag is fluttering in the wind. Cut to interior courtroom. Day. Cali Cline walks into the courtroom. She is wearing a business suit and carries a briefcase. Cut to interior judge's chambers. Day. Cali sits down in front of Henry Grant, the judge who presided over the trial of Scott Blanchard, the serial killer. She looks anxious and nervous. Cali Cline says,
I need to request a protective order against Scott Blanchard.
Henry Grant says,
Do you have enough evidence?
Cali nods. Cali Cline says,
I recently encountered him while on my way to work. He threatened me.
29. Cali Cline says,
And I truly believe I need protection from him.
Henry nods. Henry Grant says,
I understand. I will grant your request.
Cut to interior courtroom. Day. Cali stands up and leaves the courtroom. She is relieved and grateful for Henry's agreement. Fade out. Fade in. Exterior Darkshire Town Square. Day. We open on a peaceful town square, people bustling around day to day. Cut to exterior Darkshire Town Square. Continuous. Cali Cline is seen walking in. She is looking for something or someone. Cut to exterior alleyway. Continuous. We see Cali Cline coming across a figure in the alleyway. Dexter Collins emerges from the darkness and surveys the situation. Cali Cline says,
Dexter.
Dexter Collins says,
Cali.
They exchange their greetings. 30. Cali Cline says,
I'm here because I need your help. I got this protective order from Scott Blanchard.
Dexter looks concerned, but he stays calm. Dexter Collins says,
All right, let me see it.
Cali presents him the paperwork and Dexter examines it. Cut to exterior police station. Day. We see Julian Austin, a police officer, greet Cali and Dexter. They mention Scott and the protective order. Julian is surprised but relieved. Julian Austin says,
That's great news. I just got word from the federal agents. They're setting up a manhunt for that guy.
Cali is surprised and relieved. She and Dexter exchange a look. Both of them know they are now safe. Fade out. Fade in. Exterior Darkshire Town Square. Day. It's an idyllic small town square, the kind you'd expect to find in a classic Western movie. In one corner stands Scott Blanchard, a serial killer with a grisly past. He's here to add yet another victim to the list. Cut to exterior alleyway. Day. Blanchard leads an unsuspecting victim, Mary, down a dimly lit alleyway. He smiles evilly as he tightens his grip on her neck. Cut to 31. Interior alleyway. Day. Quickly, and with little remorse, Blanchard chokes the life out of Mary. Her body slumps lifelessly to the ground. Cut to exterior alleyway. Day. Blanchard takes out his camera and takes a series of photos of himself with the body, as though he's proud of his work. Cut to exterior post office. Day. Blanchard then proceeds to mail out a copy of the photo to Cali Cline, as a warning of what may happen to her if she doesn't cooperate. Fade out. Fade in. Exterior streets of Darkshire. Day. We pan slowly towards a figure walking through the lifeless streets of Darkshire. Unbeknownst to us, this man is Scott Blanchard, a known serial killer. Cut to interior post office. Day. We see Scott enter the post office. He is stained with sweat as he nervously looks around. Scott soon removes a small, white envelope from his pocket, then quickly rushes to the mailbox. He inserts the envelope into the mail slot and goes away. Cut to exterior alleyway. Day. Scott is now rushing through an alleyway, away from the post office. Suddenly, he stops. His eyes bulge as he realizes someone is watching him from a distant window. He quickly recognizes the face. It's Jane Arthurson, an old neighbor. Scott takes off running away from her. 32. Cut to exterior vacant building. Day. Now running for his life, Scott reaches a vacant building at the edge of town. He quickly slips into the building, and with one final glance behind him, he slams the door shut. We hold on this moment. Fade to black. Fade in. Exterior Ocador Empire. Day. A bustling town of Darkshire in the Ocador Empire. People are in and out of the stores, carrying bundles of goods. We see a figure in the shadows watching everything, Scott Blanchard. Exterior Scott's hideout. Day. We follow Scott to his hideout, an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. He notices activity nearby, police cars, officers walking up and down the streets. He knows something's up. Interior Scott's hideout. Day. Scott turns on the news and sees footage of himself. A manhunt is underway across the Ocador Empire, looking for Scott Blanchard, a serial killer. His eyes are full of rage now. He knows he needs to stay one step ahead of the police to avoid capture. His future depends on it. Fade to black. Fade in. Exterior Darkshire Bar. Night. The bar is cluttered and noisy, a haven for wild locals and travelers to the Okadur Empire. A biker stands alone at the bar, nursing a beer. He's the toughest character in the room and he knows it. Scott Blanchard, a serial killer, strides in, confident and aloof. He stands opposite the biker, sizing him up. Biker says,
"You're brave to come in here."
33. Scott Blanchard says,
"I can handle myself."
The biker smirks and takes a long drink. Biker says,
"You'd better be."
The biker steps forward, and they're soon engaged in a physical struggle. Punches are thrown and bar stools are overturned. The scuffle quickly turns into a full-blown bar brawl, with patrons fighting each other and Scott and the biker. Suddenly, Scott manages to make a break for the door. He escapes unnoticed, as everyone is too busy with the fight. Exterior Darkshire Bar. Night. Scott walks away from the dangers of the bar, satisfied with his escape. Fade to black. Fade into a darkened room. The only light is coming from a television set on the table. We see a figure obscured in a chair, sitting in front of the television. TV announcer, breaking news tonight from the Okadur Empire. We get a closer look at the figure, revealing the face of Scott Blanchard. He is paying intense attention to the news report. TV announcer says,
"A bar brawl in Darkshire has left several people injured. Reports suggest that."
We see a sly smile cross Scott's face. Scott Blanchard says,
"They didn't mention me."
We see Scott leaning back in his chair, the sly smile still on his face. He looks around the room and picks up a letter and a photo on the table. He reads the letter slowly, focusing on a sentence. 34. Scott Blanchard says,
"They have found my most recent victim."
Scott looks at the photo in his hands for a few moments, before crumpling it up and throwing it away. Scott says,
"Time to move on."
Fade to black. Fade in. Exterior used car lot. Day. A barely used car lot sits in a rural town of Darkshire, located in the Okadur Empire. The air is tense and quiet. A menacing figure, Scott Blanchard, walks through the lot, inspecting each car. Interior used car lot. Day. Tyson Anderson, the used car salesman, stands waiting. He nervously awaits Blanchard's arrival. Blanchard enters the office. Tyson forces a smile. Tyson Anderson says,
"Hello, how can I help you?"
Scott Blanchard says,
"Yes, I'm looking for a motorcycle."
Tyson Anderson says,
"Well, we just got in a few new models."
Scott slowly walks the aisle and stops in front of a clean-looking bike. Scott says,
"This is exactly what I'm looking for."
Tyson warily approaches him. 35. Tyson Anderson says,
"Yes, that's a nice bike. It's a good price too."
Scott Blanchard says,
"I'll take it. How much?"
Tyson swallows hard. Tyson Anderson says,
It's 1,500.
Scott pulls out his wallet and pays in cash. Tyson Anderson says,
"Thank you."
Fade out. Exterior Darkshire. Evening. The sun is setting in the small town of Darkshire. Scott Blanchard rides his new motorcycle around the corner and out of view. Exterior streets. Scott drives through the streets of the town. As he passes people, they stop and watch him go, not expecting the sight of his new bike. Exterior hidden location. Scott pulls up to a hidden location in the woods. The old abandoned house looks like it hasn't had much activity for a while. He gets off his bike and looks around. Interior hideout. Scott takes out a key and unlocks the door. He steps inside the dark room filled with clutter. He takes a seat and looks around at the evidence of his past. Exterior streets. Scott pushes his motorcycle away from the hidden location and back onto the street. The sun is setting and his journey is almost over. Obviously, the rumors about Scott Blanchard, 36, a serial killer, reaching Darkshire have been true. Fade in. Exterior Darkshire Street. Day. We enter a quaint street in the town of Darkshire, located in the Okadur Empire. We follow Dexter Collins as he makes his way to his place of work. A local coffee shop. Exterior coffee shop. Day. Dexter enters the coffee shop and is getting ready to start his shift when he notices something suspicious. We follow his gaze as he sees Scott Blanchard, the infamous serial killer, in the area. Dexter is hesitant and unsure of what to do. He takes out his cell phone and uses the camera app on it to take a picture of Scott. We follow Dexter as he quickly gets back to work and tries to ignore Scott. Scott eventually leaves the area, leaving Dexter relieved yet concerned. Fade to. Exterior street. Day. Dexter Collins, a young man in his mid-20s, walks down the cobblestone street of the foggy town of Darkshire, a small town in the Ocador Empire. He notices his uncle, Julian Austin, standing outside the police station. Julian Austin says,
"Hey, Dexter, what brings you here?"
Dexter Collins says,
"I had to see you, Uncle Julian. I saw something strange at the coffee shop."
Julian says,
"Oh, what was it?"
37. Dexter Collins says,
"I saw Scott Blanchard, the serial killer the police have been looking for."
Julian looks at the photo, astonished. Julian Austin says,
"This might be our lead in this case. Stay here. I'll get the team and look into it further."
Dexter says,
"Yes, Uncle."
Julian strides into the police station. Dexter looks out into the empty street. Fade out. Interior police station. Day. Alex Smith, a federal agent, arrives at the police station in Darkshire, a town in the Ocador Empire. He is greeted by the police chief. Police chief says,
"Welcome, Agent Smith. I assume you are here to discuss the manhunt for Scott Blanchard."
Alex nods. Alex Smith says,
"Yes, I am."
The police chief gestures to two chairs in front of his desk. Police chief says,
"Please, have a seat."
Alex and the police chief sit down. Police chief says,
"So, what are your plans to apprehend the serial killer?"
Just then, Julian Austin, a police officer, enters the room. 38. Julian Austin says,
"Excuse me, Chief. I think I might have a lead."
The police chief and Alex turn to look at Julian. Police chief says,
"Please, go ahead."
Julian Austin says,
"My nephew, Dexter Collins, works as a barista at a local coffee shop. He says he saw Scott Blanchard there a few days ago."
Alex stands up and moves closer to Julian. Alex Smith says,
"Do you know where this coffee shop is located?"
Julian nods. Julian Austin says,
"Yes, it's on Main Street."
Alex looks at the police chief. Alex Smith says,
"Let's get a team together and pay a visit to the coffee shop. I'm sure Scott Blanchard will be there."
The police chief stands up. Police chief says,
"Good idea. Let's go."
Fade to exterior Main Street, Darkshire, Ocador Empire. Evening. Alex Smith, the federal agent, the police chief, and Julian Austin enter the coffee shop and meet with Dexter Collins. They sit down to talk. Out of nowhere, one of the patrons rushes in, shouting about witnessing a murder. Patron says,
"Help! Help! I just saw a murder."
39. Julian Austin says,
"Everyone stay calm." "All right, sir, tell us what you saw."
The patron quickly describes the scene, stating that he witnessed Scott Blanchard committing the murder. Julian Austin says,
"Come, everyone, we have to go. Call in reinforcements."
They quickly head out and arrive at the scene. Julian is the first to assess the situation. Julian Austin says,
"Look at all the evidence. It all points to Scott Blanchard as the culprit. We need to find him before it's too late."
Alex, the police chief, and Julian exchange glances, silently coming to a consensus. As they leave the scene, they continue to strategize on how to find out where Scott is. Fade out. Fade in. Exterior Darkshire Police Station. Day. A police station stands in the center of a small town in the Ocador Empire. Alex Smith, a federal agent, the police chief, and Julian Austin stand outside the building, deep in conversation. Cut to Interior Police Station. Day. The group is inside the station now, at the main desk. Suddenly, they hear a ringing telephone. The police chief answers it. Police chief says,
"Darkshire Police Station."
40. On the other end of the line is Scott Blanchard, a notorious serial killer. Scott Blanchard says,
Agent Smith, Chief, Austin. I have been expecting your call.
Alex and the chief exchange a concerned glance. Scott Blanchard says,
"I must say you were too slow this time. You couldn't save my latest victim."
The police chief's face is stern. Police chief says,
"You won't get away with this. We're coming after you."
Scott Blanchard says,
"We'll see about that."
Cut to Exterior Darkshire Police Station. Day. Alex, the police chief, and Julian stand in front of the station, looking determined. Alex Smith says,
"He won't get away with this. We'll catch him."
The chief nods in agreement. Fade to Exterior Darkshire Town. Day. The town of Darkshire is a quaint place, located in the Ocador Empire. Exterior street corner. Day. As Dexter Collins is walking down the street, he comes across Scott Blanchard. Dexter recognizes him as a serial killer. 41. Scott Blanchard says,
"Hey, I remember you."
Dexter is scared and he runs away. Exterior alleyway. Day. Unfortunately, Dexter has ended up in a dead-end alleyway. Scott charges at him. Scott Blanchard says,
"You're not getting away this time."
Dexter attempts to fight back, but it is no use. Scott is too strong for him. Scott kills Dexter with one final blow. Fade in. Exterior Darkshire. Day. We see Samantha Ferguson walking down a quaint street in the Ocador Empire. She is enjoying the quiet atmosphere. The buildings are old and quaint. Exterior alleyway. Day. Suddenly, Samantha comes across an alleyway. She can sense something is off. She cautiously peeks inside. Cut 2. The alleyway is darker than the rest of the town. As Samantha approaches, she makes out a figure lying motionless on the ground. On closer inspection, she recognizes the figure to be Dexter Collins, Cali Cline's boyfriend. She quickly pulls out her phone and dials the police. Cut 2. Exterior street. Day. We see Julian Austin, a police officer, driving up to the alleyway. He steps out of the car, surveying the scene. He recognizes the corpse as being Dexter Collins, his nephew. As he walks towards Dexter, he can tell the man is dead. He quickly calls for the crime scene investigation crew. Cut 2. 42. Exterior alleyway. Day. Julian carefully examines the body, looking for any clues. He cordons off the area and calls Cali, informing her of the situation. He tries to console her and offers his help in any way he can. Fade out. Interior morgue. Day. Julian Austin, a police officer, enters the morgue in the town of Darkshire, a town in the Ocador Empire. He is met by the morgue attendants. Morgue attendant says,
"Have you called Dexter's parents yet?"
Julian Austin says,
"Yes, they should be arriving soon."
The attendants nod their heads. A few moments later, Paul and Angela Collins arrive, clearly distraught. Julian and the attendants warmly greet them. They identify the remains, discuss what happened, and all of the administrative tasks that must be completed. Julian Austin says,
"We understand that this is an incredibly difficult time for you. We've taken care of all the necessary paperwork, so when you're ready, you can make arrangements and take your son home."
After some time, the Collins bid goodbye to Julian and the attendants, and head out of the morgue. Julian watches them leave, and turns to leave himself. Fade to interior Julian Austin's home. Day. Julian Austin, an experienced police officer, is at his home, seemingly in deep thought. He has a serious look on his face. Suddenly, his phone rings, and he answers it. Julian Austin says,
"Hello."
43. Scott Blanchard says,
"Hello, Julian. This is Scott Blanchard."
Julian Austin says,
"What do you want?"
Scott Blanchard, O.S. says,
"I'm sure you've heard of my reputation. I've been busy in the small town of Darkshire."
Julian Austin says,
"What have you done?"
Scott Blanchard, O.S. says,
"I've killed your nephew, Dexter Collins."
Julian's face turns pale. Julian Austin says,
"How could you?"
Scott Blanchard, O.S. says,
"You can't stop me now."
Julian Austin says,
"I will find you and I will stop you, no matter the cost."
Exterior Julian Austin's home. Day. The camera pans out of Julian's home. Julian is still looking determined. We hear Scott's laughter in the background as the screen fades to black. Fade to exterior street in Darkshire, Ocador Empire. Day. Julian Austin, a police officer, strides down the street. He's deep in thought. 44. Interior Darkshire Police Station. Day. Julian enters the station and sees Federal Agent Alex Smith conferring with several officers. Julian Austin says,
"Alex."
The officers break off and Alex makes his way over to Julian. Alex Smith says,
"Julian, what brings you here?"
Julian Austin says,
"I just got off the phone with Scott Blanchard. He was gloating."
Alex's face turns grim. Alex Smith says,
"About Dexter."
Julian nods in confirmation. Julian Austin says,
"He's killed my nephew."
Alex takes a deep breath. Alex Smith says,
"We have to make sure he doesn't get away with it. What do you suggest?"
Julian Austin says,
"We need to get all the available information on him, investigation reports, surveillance footage, and then stake out his known locations."
Alex Smith says,
"Sounds like a plan. Let's get to work."
They exit the station and head off down the street. Fade out. Fade in. 45. Exterior office building. Day. We see an office building in the town of Darkshire, located in the Ocador Empire. Cut to interior office building. Day. We see Cali Cline walking up to her cubicle in the office. She sits down and begins to work. Cut to interior office building lobby. Day. We see Cali walking to the lobby after she gets paged. When she arrives, she notices that the serial killer, Scott Blanchard, is there. Cali Cline says,
"Oh no, it's him."
Cali attempts to hide from Scott, but he notices her. Scott Blanchard says,
"Found you."
Cali starts to run away. She manages to hide in the women's washroom, just as Scott is about to catch up to her. She takes out her cell phone and calls the police. Cut to exterior office building, day. We see the police quickly arriving at the office building to apprehend Scott. Cut to interior office building lobby, day. The police search the building, but find that Scott had already escaped. Cali goes back to work, only to hear her cell phone ring. It's Scott, mocking her. Cali says,
"Hello."
46. Scott says,
"You can never escape me."
Fade out. Interior police station, day. Cali walks into a police station, looking for Julian Austin. Cali Cline says,
"Excuse me, is Julian Austin here?"
Officer nods and points in the direction of Julian's office. Cali Cline says,
"Thank you."
Cali knocks on the door. Julian Austin says,
"Yes."
Cali Cline says,
"Hi, my name is Cali Cline. I need to talk to you about an encounter I had with a serial killer."
Julian Austin says,
"What happened?"
Cali, well, I was at my workplace this morning when I encountered the serial killer, Scott Blanchard. He was trying to burglarize the office. Julian Austin says,
"Blanchard's been eluding us for weeks. What happened?"
Cali Cline says,
"I was able to fend him off and ran out of the office. I think he got away, though."
Julian Austin says,
"We have to catch him before he strikes again. What can you tell me about the office he was trying to burglarize?"
47. Cali Cline says,
"It's in the town of Darkshire, in the Okador Empire."
Julian Austin says,
"Okay, we'll need to set up a perimeter around the building and put a team of officers near it. We have to make sure he doesn't come back."
Cali Cline says,
"All right. Is there anything else I can do to help?"
Julian Austin says,
"Yes, actually, if you can, stay near the office and inform us if Blanchard shows up again. We'll need all the help we can get."
Cali Cline says,
"I can do that."
Julian Austin says,
"Thank you. We'll keep you updated on our progress."
Fade in. Exterior outskirts of office building, day. Scott Blanchard steps off his motorcycle, looking up at the tall, intimidating office building. He notices the perimeter of police officers around the area and realizes his plans of revenge against Cali Cline won't be as easy as he thought. Angle on Scott's face. His expression is one of determination. Scott Blanchard says,
"No matter, I'm still getting my way."
48. Exterior alleyway, day. Scott walks down a dark alley, making sure he isn't spotted by anyone. He knows he needs to come up with a plan to get inside the office building, and he begins to search for an alternate route. Interior office building, day. Scott finds his way in, undetected by the police officers. He starts to get the lay of the land in the office building, looking to find out where Cali is. Intercut. Voiceover says,
"I won't be turned away. I'm getting revenge against Cali no matter what."
Montage. Scott searching for Cali. Scott blending in with the people in the office. Scott getting closer to Cali's office. End montage. Fade in. Exterior Darkshire Business District, day. Cali Cline, an employee of one of the businesses in the heart of the Okador Empire, makes her way up the stairs and into the air-conditioned office building. Interior office lighting, day. Cali is in her office, typing away on her computer. Suddenly, she hears a noise from the hallway outside and the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Exterior office building hallway, day. Cali cautiously moves out of her office and into the hallway. She stops dead in her tracks when she comes face to face with Scott Blanchard, a serial killer who somehow managed to sneak past the security perimeter. He has a menacing look on his face. 49. Cali immediately turns and starts running away from him. Exterior office building stairwell, day. Cali runs into a stairwell, her feet moving quickly as she takes 2 steps at a time. Scott follows close behind her, not giving up the chase. Interior office of company president, day. Cali manages to get into the office of her company's president and quickly slams the door shut. She looks around the room for something to barricade the door with. Exterior office building stairwell, day. Meanwhile, Scott is still pounding on the door to the president's office, determined to get in. Interior office of company president, day. Cali manages to get to the desk and spots an office phone. She quickly picks it up and dials the police. Exterior Darkshire Street, day. The police arrive just in time, and they manage to surround Scott and arrest him. They take him away in handcuffs, as Cali watches in relief. Cali steps further into the president's office. She looks out over the town and hears shouts of people in the streets. She turns around and sees a couple of police officers escorting Scott Blanchard, a serial killer, in handcuffs. Cali Cline says,
"There he is. He's been captured."
Cali pulls out her phone and dials Julian Austin's number. He picks up. Julian Austin says,
"Hey Cali."
Cali Cline says,
"Hey Julian. I just wanted to call and let you know. Scott Blanchard has been captured."
Julian, oh wow, that's great news. 50, Cali Cline says.
"Yeah, I'm standing in the company president's office looking out at the town. There's a huge crowd of people cheering and doing the same."
Julian Austin says,
"That's amazing news. I'm so proud of you for helping make that happen."
Cali Cline says,
"Thanks. I'm glad it's all over now."
Julian Austin says,
"Me too."
Cali hangs up the phone and looks out at the town. There's a new energy in the air as people celebrate the end of the terror Scott caused. Camera pans out of the office window with the people laughing and cheering in the background, signaling the end of the serial killer's reign. Fade in. Exterior sky. Day. The sun rises over the town of Darkshire, a small town in the Okadur Empire. Exterior street. Day. Cali Cline, a young office worker from the city, walks down the street. She's here to cover the aftermath of the arrest of Scott Blanchard, the serial killer who terrorized Darkshire. She's in town to tell the story of the people affected by his cruel acts. Exterior police station. Day. Cali meets with Julian Austin, a police officer who played a key role in Blanchard's arrest. He's the brother of Dexter Collins' mother. Julian Austin says,
"We wanted to find him before he hurt anyone else."
Cali nods in sympathy. 51. Exterior church. Day. Cali and Julian walk to the church. They're here to meet with Dexter's parents who are making funeral arrangements. Interior church. Day. Kim Collins, Dexter's mother, and her husband Kenneth are surrounded by friends and family. Kim Collins says,
"We never thought this would happen to our son."
Julian hugs Kim and Kenneth. Julian Austin says,
"I'm so sorry."
Cali watches from the side, feeling both sadness and admiration. Exterior grave site. Night. The funeral takes place with Kim and Kenneth holding each other for strength. Julian is also present, supporting them during this difficult time. Fade to Interior Darkshire Police Station. Day. We find Officer Julian Austin at his desk in the police station, sipping a cup of coffee. Cell phone ringing. Julian looks startled by the sound of his cell phone ringing. He quickly grabs it to take the call. Cut to Interior Darkshire Police Station. Day. We can see Julian pacing back and forth as he's talking on the phone. Julian Austin says,
"What? Are you sure?"
He stops in his tracks as he hears the news. 52. Julian says,
"Scott Blanchard. He's in Darkshire."
Cut to Interior Darkshire Police Station. Day. Julian slams the phone down on the desk and slams his fist down in anger. Julian Austin says,
"All right, everyone, we've got a situation. Scott Blanchard, the serial killer, has escaped federal custody and is in Darkshire. We need to deploy all available officers and set up a search perimeter. Move quickly."
As the officers prepare to move out, Julian takes a deep breath and gets ready for what he's sure will be a long night. Fade to Interior Cali's home. Day. Cali Cline, a young woman, sits on her living room couch. Julian Austin, a police officer, is standing in front of her with a solemn look on his face. Julian Austin says,
"I'm sorry to tell you this, Cali, but Scott Blanchard, the serial killer, has escaped from federal custody."
Cali, shocked and perplexed, looks up at Julian. Cali Cline says,
"What? How is that even possible?"
Julian shakes his head sadly. Julian Austin says,
"We're not sure yet. We're still looking into it."
53. Cali stands up, looking around the room. Cali Cline says,
"So he's out there. And he could be coming for me."
Julian nods. Julian Austin says,
"We need to make a plan."
Cali brightens a bit, focusing on the task at hand. Cali Cline says,
"Let's do it."
Fade to exterior of an old abandoned house on the outskirts of Darkshire. Scott Blanchard arrives, cautiously looking around to make sure no one is following him. He makes his way to the door of the old abandoned house. Scott Blanchard says,
"I don't see anyone watching me. I made it."
He opens the door and enters the house. Scott Blanchard says,
"Ah, my hideout. Finally, I'm safe."
He walks rooms of the abandoned house, flashback scenes of when he was caught by federal agents playing in the background. He collects his knife and cell phone before heading back outside. Scott Blanchard says,
Time to make plans.
Fade to interior dark room. Day. Scott Blanchard is talking into the phone. Scott Blanchard says,
Hey, Julian, do you remember me?
54. Cut to Julian, Austin, Indiana, a bustling police station, looking both alarmed and determined as he hears the distinct voice coming from the cell phone. Julian Austin says,
Scott Blanchard, you're in town.
Cut back to Blanchard in his closet-like hideout. He smirks and leans against the wall, hands behind his back. His eyes narrow as he talks. Scott Blanchard says,
That's right, I'm in Darkshire. What are you going to do about it?
Fade to Julian, now tapping an eager finger on the desk as he stares intently out the window. His expression is grim. Julian Austin says,
I will find you, Scott, and I will bring you to justice.
Fade back to Blanchard, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. Scott Blanchard says,
We'll see about that.
Fade in, interior Darkshire Police Station. Julian Austin, OS, says,
Welcome to Darkshire, Agent Smith.
Alex Smith, a federal agent, steps forward. Alex Smith says,
Thank you, Officer Austin.
Julian and Alex stand in the center of the police station. Julian Austin says,
What brings you to Darkshire?
Alex Smith says,
I'm searching for a man who escaped from our custody. His name is Scott Blanchard.
55. Julian Austin says,
I'm familiar with Scott Blanchard and his escape. I've heard that you've launched an investigation.
Alex Smith says,
Yes, we have. We believe that Scott had help escaping from custody. We need to uncover who, if anyone, was involved in his escape.
Julian Austin says,
So what can I do to help?
Alex Smith says,
We have reason to believe that Scott had help leaving the prison. We need to uncover what kind of help he had and who may have provided it.
Julian says,
I'll do my best to help you in this investigation.
Alex says,
Thank you. Let's get started.
Interior Police Station. Day. Julian Austin, a police officer, stands at the station desk with a disgruntled expression. Alex Smith, a federal agent, enters the scene. Alex Smith says,
What's wrong?
Julian Austin says,
It's Scott Blanchard.
Alex Smith says,
What about him?
Julian Austin says,
I've been getting taunting phone calls from him all day. He's a serial killer who's been terrorizing the town of Darkshire.
Alex's phone rings. Julian and Alex turn to see the number. It's Scott Blanchard. 56. Alex Smith says,
That's him.
Julian motions for Alex to listen in as Julian secretly gets the call tracing. Julian Austin says,
Sorry, Scott. I'm gonna catch you eventually, no matter how much you mock me.
Scott Blanchard says,
Nice try, Julian. You'll never catch me, I'm way too slippery.
Julian Austin says,
We'll see about that.
The call ends. Julian and Alex share a determined look. Julian Austin says,
Let's get to work.
Interior Darkshire Street. Day. We see a cobblestone street with old colonial brick buildings on either side. It is a cloudy, dreary day, perfect for hiding one's tracks. Suddenly, a figure comes into view. Scott Blanchard, a serial killer. He is wearing a heavy overcoat despite the weather, as if to cover up his presence. He is looking around suspiciously, as if he is looking for something or someone. Cut to exterior Darkshire Street. Later, we see Scott in a nearby alleyway, facing a young woman, Samantha Ferguson, a resident of the town. She takes one look at Scott and recognizes him. He is, after all, one of the town's most notorious criminals. Scared, she turns to run, but before she can make it away, Scott pulls out a knife and slashes her several times. She cries out in pain as her wounds begin to bleed. Cut to 57, interior Darkshire Street. Continuous. We see Scott with a smirk on his face, the knife now in his coat pocket. He turns to walk away, leaving Samantha behind in a pool of her own blood. Dissolve to exterior Darkshire Street. Later, we see the police arriving on the scene, the street now crowded with onlookers. They are all too late, however. Scott has escaped, leaving behind another body for the police to find. Fade out. Interior Scott's hideout. Night. Scott is pacing around, planning his next move. He stops in front of a wall covered in notes and maps, scribbled with handwritten phrases and locations. Scott Blanchard says,
Cali Cline, somewhere in Darkshire. I have the address.
He grabs a piece of paper with the address written on it and puts it in his pocket. Scott Blanchard says,
It's time to move.
Exterior street outside Cali's house. Night. Scott is walking slowly towards Cali's house, watching her house from a distance. Scott Blanchard says,
I'm going to get you, Cali.
Interior Cali's house. night. Cali is lounging in the living room. Suddenly, she hears a noise coming from outside. She gets up and looks out the window, surveying the street. She notices a figure slowly stalking away from the house. 58. Exterior street outside Cali's house. Night. Scott is walking away from the house, feeling accomplished. Scott Blanchard says,
"Nothing can stop me now."
Fade out. Fade into interior of Cali's house in Darkshire. Cali is standing in her living room looking around, uncertain. She looks outside. We can hear the sound of a distant police siren in the background. Cali Cline says,
"I know I saw him. I swear I saw Scott Blanchard standing right here."
Cali takes out her cell phone and dials the police. Cali Cline says,
"Yes, hello. I need to report a sighting of the serial killer Scott Blanchard in the town of Darkshire."
Cuts to a shot of Scott Blanchard running away from the scene, just as the police siren gets louder. Cuts to interior of the police station. Officer Julian Austin is sitting at his desk, listening to the call. He stands and grabs his hat. Julian Austin says,
"I'm on my way."
Cuts to exterior of Cali's house. Julian pulls up in his patrol car and exits the car. Julian Austin says,
"Ma'am, I'm Officer Austin. I understand you saw Scott Blanchard here."
Cali Cline says,
"Yes, he was right here. But he must have heard the sirens and got away."
59. Julian Austin says,
"I see. Thank you for calling us. We'll do our best to catch him."
Fade to exterior Darkshire streets. Night. We follow Scott Blanchard, a notorious serial killer, as he walks the streets of Darkshire, a town in the Okadur Empire. He is wearing a hooded coat and carrying a knife in his hand. He stops at a derelict building, his hideout. He looks around before entering. Interior hideout. Night. Scott enters and looks around. He sets his knife down on a table. He takes a deep breath and looks around one more time before leaving. Exterior streets. Night. Scott takes off, walking down the street. He soon arrives at the house of Cali Cline, the woman who helped send him to prison. He stops outside and looks around. He takes a deep breath and steels himself before breaking in. Interior Cali's house. Night. Scott manages to break into the house. He looks around and finds Cali hiding in a corner. He attempts to get his revenge on her, but Cali manages to escape from him. Exterior streets. Night. Scott chases after Cali, but she manages to outrun him. He stops and watches her run away. He takes a deep breath and shakes his head before walking away. Fade to exterior Darkshire. Night. We see Cali Cline walking through the streets of Darkshire. She looks weary and traumatized from her encounter with serial killer Scott Blanchard. 60. Exterior Cali's house. Night. Cali enters her house and closes the door firmly behind her. She takes a few deep breaths and starts to make her way towards the phone. Interior Cali's house. Night. Cali pauses in front of the phone for a moment before picking up the receiver and dialing a number. Cut to exterior police station. Night. We see Julian Austin, a police officer, walking into the police station. Cut to interior Cali's house. Night. Cali is on the phone, speaking to Julian. Cali Cline says,
"Julian, it's me. I need your help. I'm in Darkshire, and I'm in trouble. Scott Blanchard was here."
Julian Austin says,
"Calm down. Tell me what happened."
Cali Cline says,
"He's a serial killer, Julian. He's here, in Darkshire. I just escaped him. He left the area."
Julian says,
"I'm on my way. Just stay where you are, and keep safe."
Cali says,
"Okay, thank you."
Fade to exterior street in Darkshire. Night. A police car pulls up to a small house. Julian Austin, a police officer, steps out of the car and heads towards the house. 61. Cut to interior house. Day. Julian enters the house and is greeted by Cali Cline. Cali Cline says,
"Hello, officer."
Julian Austin says,
"Good evening, Miss Cline. I understand you had a run-in with a dangerous criminal."
Cali Cline says,
"Yes, it was Scott Blanchard. He's a serial killer."
Julian takes out a notepad and starts writing. Julian Austin says,
"Okay, can you tell me what happened?"
Cali Cline says,
"I was at my home. He found his way to my home. He manages to break in. I barely managed to escape from him."
Julian continues to take notes. Julian Austin says,
"And what did he look like?"
Cali Cline says,
"He was tall and muscular, with dark hair. He was wearing a black leather jacket."
Julian Austin says.
Do you have any other information that might help us?
Cali Cline says.
I heard him mention something about a meeting at the old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town.
62. Julian finishes writing and puts away his notepad. Julian Austin says.
Thank you for your help, Miss Cline. I'll look into this right away.
Cut to exterior street in Darkshire. Night. Julian gets back into his police car and drives off. Fade to exterior Darkshire. Day. We see Julian Austin, a police officer, walking through the streets of Darkshire, a town in the Okadur Empire. He has a determined look on his face, as if he is on a mission. Julian Austin says,
I'm going to follow through on this lead, no matter what.
He continues walking until he reaches the outskirts of town. We can see an old abandoned factory in the distance. Julian Austin says,
That must be it.
He walks towards the factory. Exterior abandoned factory. Day. Julian enters the factory, looking around cautiously. Suddenly, he hears a noise coming from above. He looks up, and we see Scott Blanchard standing on the catwalk above. Scott Blanchard says,
You shouldn't have come here, Julian.
Julian pulls out his gun, but Scott is too fast. He jumps down and starts fighting Julian. They struggle, trading punches and kicks, until they end up on the catwalk. Julian has the upper hand, and he is about to win the fight. 63. Julian Austin says,
This is the end for you, Scott.
Scott pleads for mercy, but Julian is unmoved. He pulls out his gun and fires, shooting Scott in the process. Cut to exterior Darkshire. Day. We are in the town of Darkshire. It is a bustling town surrounded by mountains in the Okadur Empire. The streets are filled with bustling people and the sun is casting a soft glow in the sky. Exterior abandoned factory. Day. In an old abandoned factory alleyway, we see Julian Austin, a police officer. He is standing over the body of Scott Blanchard, a notorious serial killer. Julian is visibly shaken, and his hands are trembling. Julian Austin says,
He's gone.
Julian takes a deep breath and bends down, using his finger to close Scott's eyes. Julian Austin says,
Rest in peace.
He stands up and looks into camera. Julian Austin says,
This is Officer Julian Austin. I need a meat wagon at this location immediately.
Julian stands still as he waits for the wagon to arrive. The sound of the ambulance can be heard in the distance. Exterior abandoned factory. Day. A meat wagon arrives and two people jump out of the wagon. They approach Julian and bow to him in respect. Man says,
What happened, Officer Austin?
64. Julian Austin says,
Scott Blanchard is dead. It's over.
The man nods in acknowledgement. Man says,
We'll take him from here.
Julian nods and watches as the men proceed to gather the remains. As the wagon drives away, Julian takes out his phone and dials a number. Exterior Julian's home. Day. We are in front of an old, cozy-looking home. The door opens and a woman, Cali Cline, steps out. She has a worried look on her face. Julian Austin says,
Cali, it's me.
Cali Cline says,
Julian? What's wrong?
Julian Austin says,
He's gone.
Cali Cline says,
You mean?
Julian Austin says,
Scott Blanchard is dead. He won't be able to threaten you or anyone else anymore.
Cali covers her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. Cali Cline says,
Julian, thank you.
Julian Austin says,
I've been keeping you safe. That's what I do.
Cali smiles and wipes away her tears. 65. Fade out. Fade in. Cali Cline says,
I had been living in the town of Darkshire since I was a child.
Exterior Darkshire. Day. We see a large town that's stretching out over several hills, with buildings sprinkled in between. Exterior Cali's house. Day. We see a modest two-story house against the backdrop of the town. Interior Cali's house. Day. Cali is sitting in her living room. She's looking out into the darkness, deep in thought. Cut to exterior dark alley. Day. A mysterious figure is lurking in the darkness. Cut to interior Cali's house. Day. Cali is suddenly startled by a noise outside her window. She closes the curtains. Cali Cline says,
What was that?
Cut to exterior dark alleyway. Night. We see a young woman with dark hair in the shadows. It's Laura Cline, Cali's aunt. Cut to 66. Interior Cali's dream. Night. Cali is now in a dream state. She's standing in front of a dark alleyway where Laura is standing. Laura Cline says,
Cali, is that you?
Cali Cline says,
Yes, Aunt Laura.
Laura Cline says,
It's all right. I know why you're here.
Cali Cline says,
I've come to tell you that Scott Blanchard has been killed.
Laura's expression changes from sadness to relief. Laura Cline says,
"Thank you, Cali. Now I can move on and find peace."
Cut to exterior dark alleyway. Night. Laura slowly fades away into the darkness. Cut to interior Cali's room. Day. Cali wakes up from her dream, relieved that she has been able to find some closure for her Aunt Laura. Fade out. Exterior graveyard. Day. Fade into a close-up on Cali Cline, standing in front of the grave of her beloved Dexter Collins. Her face is filled with emotion. Camera pans out and focuses on the gravestone. Cali Cline says,
"Hey Dexter. I'm here at last. I can't help but think of all the
67, Cali Cline says,
things we could have done together. But I guess those days are gone."
Camera zooms in on Cali, her face full of sadness and sorrow. Cali Cline says,
"I wanted to let you know that your killer, Scott Blanchard, has finally been stopped. He can't hurt anyone else now."
Camera slowly zooms out, revealing Cali's face in a pained expression. Cali Cline says,
"It's not fair. You're gone. But I know your spirit is here. You can rest in peace now."
Fade out as Cali takes one last look at Dexter's grave. Cut to exterior graveyard. Day. We see the ghost of Dexter Collins standing near a tree. He nods in approval. He proceeds to fade away. Exterior graveyard. Day. We see the ghost of Laura Cline standing near her grave. She nods in approval. She proceeds to fade away. Fade to black. Roll credits. The end.
Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more content. Let's not forget to leave comments if you like.